Hello, everyone. This is the Ophthalmology Business Podcast, where we help you develop your ideal practice with the help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, law, and more. I am Naren Arulraja, the founder and one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy, www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Our guest today has a very diverse background. She's the founder and CEO of Phone COA LLC, an attorney at Practice Management and Legal Consulting, and also the podcast host of Practice Management Insights. We are really excited to have Ashlie Malone with us today. And the topic we're going to be covering is thinking outside of the box to create new practice management efficiencies. Before we get started, Ashlie, can you take a minute to tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do? How did you start working with ophthalmology? Maybe even date yourself as to when you started doing that, and tell us a little bit about your business also.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me too. It's always fun talking to fellow, professionals in the ophthalmic space. So I appreciate it. Yeah, it's funny because when you have experience, you do date yourself, right? So I've been in ophthalmology now for well over 20 years, 22 years. Honestly, my background started with marketing. And so I entered the space through a marketing position where I was hired to develop the referral network for a LASIK center. And then that just grew and grew and grew. And I went into the business side of ophthalmology. I worked on the inside of a hospital department of ophthalmology, and then went into private practice to help a group in my town of Charleston, South Carolina, develop a surgical group. Worked there for 16 years, and then they sold to private equity, and then I moved on. So I also have been doing consulting work for years. I always did that kind of in addition to I call it my day job. Just because I just can't help myself. I love working with practices. I love tackling problems and really, partnering and finding solutions.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Let's jump right in. I have some questions that I want to go through. So again, the topic is thinking outside of the box to create new practice management efficiencies. So the first question I have for you is, can you share some examples of traditional practice management methods and how they might be limiting efficiency in today's environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, because to answer it, I feel like we almost have to take a step back because the landscape has changed almost 100%. So how I would have answered that even a few months ago, what does that even mean anymore? So traditional methods, they used to mean that a practice was a little more traditional. They were conservative, and there was a couple of private owners, physicians that started the practice, and they were using kind of just more traditional ways of management. Um, now it's the landscape has changed so much, and a lot of private practices have gone through the acquisition phase or rolled into the local hospital. And so those traditional practice management methods, just a lot of them, to be honest, are just now corporate, methods. So those, the challenge then is that on the inside of the walls, you have real problems and you have real inefficiencies, and just how to then, tackle those. What I still tell my go-to that I've always said, and it's kind of a joke, but I reference it as phone a friend. So what I could tell you is the traditional way of doing things have been, just kind of, they're the old traditional way of doing things has evolved into a new traditional way of doing things. So the, advice I give is don't be afraid to secure outside resources. Phone a friend, hire the consultant, hire the person with the expertise on the outside of the walls of the practice, and really just look at it from a different lens.
When you say traditional versus, so I'm trying to kind of put my arms around it. So can you give me an example of like what would somebody would have done in a traditional situation versus, what they probably have to do today?
So traditional in my mind, and that's a good question because I think it means different things to different people, but traditional in my mind would be a typical practice. So there tends to be, especially when you work with different practices, you see the commonalities. And there's usually a doctor or two. They go to medical school. They want to provide patient care. So they go into the community. But the reality is that most doctors, in my experience, have never really had a business background. So they haven't had the business classes, they haven't had the training. So traditional is that they would start the practice, they would have, the real estate side of it, they would hire some staff, they'd hire a couple technicians, and they would go to work. So that was really the traditional way of doing things. And then you fast forward and the healthcare industry became a business. Somewhere along the lines, it became a business. So a lot of the inefficiencies that I have seen, and this is why I said, I would change my answer in the last 6 months, but 2 years ago, when I would consult with practices, it's kind of just that they needed to understand the business side of running their practice. So the accounting, efficiencies, how they are scheduling patients, all of those things would be traditional hiccups. So in those senses, you can hire resources to help you out in those areas. There's consultants that will tackle any part of your practice depending on what's going on with you. But then you fast forward in the last 6 months, year, 18 months, a lot of healthcare practices, especially in the ophthalmology space, are now owned by corporate. So now it's kind of changed the whole landscape. And so now you're trying to figure out like what exactly is your pain point? What can we hone in on as far as, what your day is looking like and what kind of problems you might be having?
Right, right. Makes sense. Let me go to question number two I have for you. What are some of the common challenges practices face when trying to innovate their management approaches? So let's say it's a traditional practice and they're like, okay, you know, I want to do what works in 2024. So and they're trying to do things differently. Like what are some of the things you see practices trying to do differently, and what are some of the challenges that you see them running into?
So I can tell you from my perspective on the outside and on the inside, there's the two challenges I can think of probably are at the highest of the list is number one is you still have reluctance. You still have this conservative traditional approach to patient care that it's very linear. It's, we see 35 patients a day. This is how we do it and this is how we get through our day. So honestly, I feel like the number one challenge is just getting all the stakeholders on the same page and being willing to think outside the box a little bit and think about what kind of resources we could be bringing into the practice that can create these efficiencies and that can try to make things better quite honestly, it's a fairly chaotic environment. And so anything that we can do to bring into the practice, whether it be technology, scheduling systems or new phone systems, things like that, or, using outside resources like Phone COA or these other types of companies that have these new ways of creating those efficiencies. And then I would say number two is just the willingness to invest in those efficiencies. So reluctance, or getting everyone on the same page is really, really challenging. But then also being willing to invest in what needs to be invested in. It's no longer just having, new carpet on the floor. It's really making sure that you're investing in the things that make your practice better.
So Phone COA, like I know you mentioned it. Tell me what is it?
I would love to talk to you about Phone COA. Phone COA was birthed. It was born from my own frustrations within a practice, the practice I was involved in. We had so many inefficiencies in clinic. We were doing everything right. We had fantastic surgeons, awesome staff, patients, out the door, everything was right. But we had so many problems. Patients were waiting hour and a half, 2 hours, 2.5 hours to see their doctor. The techs were exhausted. Patients were frustrated. You know, how many times do you hear that you just feel like it's a cattle call? You feel like you're just one of a number. And so what I did was I started really looking at that and what could we do to make that better? And, you know, just to pause on COVID for a second, for all the terrible things that COVID was, it really made us think outside the box and it made us look at things. We all had to work from home all of a sudden, and we had to look at new ways of doing things, and patient care is no different. So what Phone COA does is try to create efficiencies within the flow of clinic, that anything that you can carve out from clinic and get it done ahead of time. So what we did was we created a company. We have all certified technicians. They're all COA or COT, and all of our technicians are experienced in different EMR systems. And when we have a client who may be struggling with efficiencies in clinic, meaning long patient wait times, or maybe they're booked out too far and they can't see the patients as quick as they would like to, or maybe patients are just really frustrated, they work with us, we work with them, and we assign a virtual technician team to their practice that then serves as an extension of their in-office technicians. So what we do is they have a team assigned to them depending on how many charts they have, how many patients they have, depends on how many technicians they're assigned. And then those technicians work exclusively on that account. And we contact patients ahead of time before their appointment. We are we log in directly to the practice's EMR system. So we then interview the patients. We do a phone interview with them before their appointment from the comfort of their home or a hotel room or in their car or wherever they are. And we get all their information ahead of time. And then our techs enter it directly into the EMR system. So as an example, in a traditional, you know, workup for a new cataract patient, for example, it could take anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes in the office. So, you know, that's a really long visit with one patient, and they take the technician's time that entire workup. So what we're doing is we're trying to get the first, you know, 20 minutes or so of those encounters, we're trying to do those from the comfort of the patient's home prior to them coming in. That way, when they're in the office, it can go much quicker, it's more efficient, and that patient already has that connection then with that office. And so just the secondary benefits, we're seeing that they have lower no-show rates, and that their general satisfaction tends to be higher.
Well, that's awesome. Um, let's talk about technology and automation. What role do you see technology and automation play in creating efficiencies? And how can practices leverage them effectively while still maintaining a personal touch? Perhaps you can again share some examples, share some stories.
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's a lot of technology out there right now. Honestly, I wouldn't say though that all of them are creating the efficiencies or the satisfaction, but they are super helpful. So, you know, everyone should be looking at technology as a whole. Is there anything that we can be doing better with the call center, with the scheduling programs, having phone trees, having, you know, resources available to patients? Any technology that makes that better, I do think is worth at least looking at. The second part of your question, though, is the real trick to make sure that it's improving efficiency, but it's also still serving the patient and serving the needs of the kind of the human interaction with that patient. Um, so it's interesting. It's a loaded question, but there's definitely resources out there in the ophthalmic space. A lot of things have bubbled up. Like I said, you know, COVID also brought a lot of creativity, and a lot of different resources have now come to market. There's virtual scribe services. There's you know, Phone COA as an example. There's different services that can support practices through the use of technology, that aren't just an IT-based solution. Another example that you know, I'm working with now, it's called Lumata Health, for example. It's a technology-based company but they're providing primary principal care management services to patients. So it's using technology, but it still has this human element where they also use certified technicians who are reaching out to patients in between the patient's visits and helping them coordinate things like transportation or appointments with other physicians. And, very much along the lines of Phone COA, just ways to kind of leverage that and still maintain that human connection with patients to make them happier and more efficient.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, I think the good news is because you are a lawyer, you kind of, I mean, one of the things that I know anyone who has studied, law tells me is they learn how to ask questions, how to think, how to look at things differently. Like look for all the things that can go wrong. I mean, right? That's one of the things that lawyers are good at. But what comes with that is you can avoid a lot of pain and suffering in the long term. So I think that brain, that training, and of course, being in ophthalmology for 20 years has positioned you to kind of look at things very unconventionally, look at things in a, hey, what if, we do it this way? And of course, it's not like you're just talking about it, you're trying it, you're working with your clients, seeing what happens, learning from it, improving it. And like you said, COVID was a game changer in some interesting ways because it made all of us rethink everything about who we are, what we want from our lives to, what's important and how we do things. So anyways, so thank you for everything you have shared with me. As I wrap this up, any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I mean, the big thing is just to encourage practices. I think healthcare workers in general are pretty worn out. I've got a lot of them in my life, and it's tough. It's a tough field, but just know that you're supported and appreciated, and just hang in there and encourage whoever you report to and whoever's managing your practice. Just keep encouraging them. Use your big person voice, and just make sure that we're trying to kind of keep moving forward, and remember at the end of the day it's still about the patients.
Thank you so much, Ashlie, for joining us today and talking to us about thinking outside of the box to create new practice management efficiencies. I also want to take a moment to thank all of our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, please share it with your friends on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.